uh, uh, uh. I just love to do that thing. Anyway, that intro is definitely going to change because I'm going to do a new show on Spreaker called Voice of Reason. I'm probably biting that from some people, but I don't listen to a Voice of Reason show, so I don't care. It's what I want to call mine, so yeah. Anyway, so with Spreaker, you could kind of upgrade into, and I'm not advertising for Spreaker, it's just what I use, because it's really simple for me, and I'm a really simple person when it comes to technology. I could do amazing things with technology once they're dumbed down to kind of the AOL big button level. It's kind of an ADHD symptom, but enough about me. Let's talk about me. I am going to start the Voice of Reason show, and it's just going to be, a button press to do a new show, but I'm going to kind of change what I'm doing from a stream of consciousness type thing into more of a kind of a quid pro quo information resource. And this is more than just the Spreaker show. I'm also planning on, packing up those cigarettes. By the way, I don't work for Big Tobacco or anything either. This is more me trying to up my game, and I'm going to try to get some sort of website, again, as simple as possible. Like using things that kids in like 4th grade use to make their websites, or some sort of service that'll just, I'll pay $10 a month or something, and they could do my website. As long as like I can put advertising on it, that's my own. That'll be like, going, not just like going to whatever site or whatever other channels, whatever other streams. But, I could put my PayPal on that and stuff like that. As long as I have a little bit of freedom. So any suggestions would be nice. And I want it to be, to have something to do with Voice of Reason. So I'll check out the iterations and what's available. Because that's really what I've always wanted to do. I don't have like a research department. It's just little old me. But I hope to kind of one day get something together where I get research and official statistics and stuff like that, and kind of make that almost like a searchable database on my website. And also, not only a resource for me to use, but for other independent media. And there's been a lot of talk lately about the free press taking over from the mainstream media. And yeah, blatantly so. We're trying to do that. My stream isn't the greatest example of that. I just started it. But the idea behind it is that I eventually want to do not like a CNN or some huge thing, more things as they come up for me, which is mostly what people are doing. But I want to, have some sort of database of facts and archives of articles and all that stuff that I could kind of look at, and not just, do my own research and have a place where other people can do research. But I also want, that source to be there for people. And I want to explain what, because a lot of these sources, like a research study, most laymen are not going to be able to really read it. And understand what it means. So I want to be not just a resource providing those sources and those like main sources that everybody else uses, but I'm hoping to kind of up the game and, explain to people what a lot of this stuff means. What did these statistical analyses mean? What the hell is a standard deviation, and is that important? I want to get more to the nitty gritty. We're still in kind of that pop psych world I talk about all the time. It's not just pop psych; it's kind of pop science. We hear a statistic and we think, "Oh, it's a statistic; it must be true." Not really realizing how statistics are true and in what way they might be true in that particular circumstance. So I want to be kind of a quid pro quo resource, and I don't want to sit here and tell everybody what to think. I want to commentate a certain extent, freedom of speech and all that. and I'm not going to deny my own, but I'll try to plainly put out that this is my opinion. I'll try to explain things more in terms of A, B, or C might be true. It seems more likely that A would be true in this instance. So it might come across as a bit dry, but a lot of people in the past have asked me, like, what do we know what the truth is? And, well, no media source is really going to be able to tell you the truth. They're not omniscient. Outside of them, like, directly kind of propagandizing and, saying things that are false or misinforming or giving a lack of information and explaining things from that point of view, there's just the fact that no journalist is omniscient. We're not deities. We only can say what we think is true, and that could be our opinion, and we should blatantly say that it is so. But we can also kind of give a range of possibilities, and that's really the future of media. Instead of the kind of propagandized media we all used to make fun of, especially during the Cold War, as the kind of like the Pravda, which is what I call the mainstream media truth, is the Pravda. That's my little phrase for it, because it's definitely coming from a hugely biased stance, in my opinion. I don't think that's really argued by too many people that it isn't. Professional media has kind of moved towards bias while claiming to be professional, and now it's just gone so overboard that nobody cares anymore. We don't care if they even call themselves professional or fair and balanced. We just want to hear, the echo chamber, which is usually a kind of half-truth, if it's even that. So I'm going to read the tea leaves in a different way than most people would. Yes, there will be kind of like the sticks, hex, and hammer kind of opinion on things. Using critical thinking and logical progressions and the evidence that I see, and hopefully it'll be an educated opinion as opposed to from the hip or propagandized and I don't know it. But in addition to that, I want to have, like I said, the different paths that it could take, the different, in psychology they call them antecedents, that are possible, because we don't know what happened. Somebody shows up to a crash scene, they know there was a crash, they see the end product of that crash. They may talk to a fireman or an EMT, they may get wrong or right information. We see that all the time whenever there's a big story. People kind of, and even the mainstream news will kind of qualify it and be like, so far we have one statement saying there were 2 victims that has not been corroborated. So even that, let's say 3 people corroborated, but they're all wrong. That could be wrong. So they're really kind of telling us in that way already. They're kind of still keeping that kind of old school media, or at least what we were taught media it should be. I'm just going to go a little beyond with that. I'm going to be more open and honest with things I don't know, and do my research and try, like I said, provide a resource for other independent media so that maybe we could have a free press in this country. I don't know if we ever did have a free press. There are arguments on both sides as far as that, and I'm not going to profess to know. I just know that even in the 80s, and I was born in 75, by the way, so I wasn't too conscious before then, but I'm sure there were a lot of movies in the 70s and late 60s too. There was a lot about these. There were still independent media companies. I think that was codified in law. I'm not sure when that went away. But these media companies would have advertisers. And at least when I was conscious, and I started noticing, anytime they had any kind of like newsroom on a TV show during that period, there would always be this kind of situation where somebody had pissed off a certain amount of advertisers. or a main advertiser, and they were either getting fired or reprimanded, and they had to move somewhere else. And there's even things that were kind of loose documentaries, like the Howard Stern movie, where a lot of that happened to him. But then some of the radio execs figured out that people who hate him actually listen to the show even more than the people who don't. So the advertisers were like, woohoo, that works for me. But what wasn't mentioned in those times, hopefully because it was codified into law, was the whole kind of concept of a corporation that makes like fighter jets or the engines for them, like GE, owning all sorts of media. I don't think that was allowed for a long time, and somehow that suddenly started happening. I think it was the first wave of deregulation with Reagan, but it may have been after. I haven't really researched this. So I'll tell you right now, this would not fly on Voice of Reason. And I'll also endeavor to smoke less when I'm doing Voice of Reason, but it kind of keeps my head straight. Maybe I'll like have, do nicotine patches or something. And when that was happening, I remember on one of the late night talk shows, David Letterman. Sorry, it took me a second to process that. Now, David Letterman was like this legendary thing back in the day. And part of the reason was because David Letterman had some balls back then. He would do like stupid human tricks and all these really entertaining things. But he kind of let his opinion leak out there sometimes. And I believe GE bought NBC. And he used to call them, my corporate masters, right? And eventually he had to go on to CBS, I believe, because of that. I'm sure CBS is owned by some other like mega corporation or like this like media group like Fox is. And the ownership of this shit is pretty suspicious. And if we were kind of talking against advertising having a say on what goes on the nightly news, if we were talking about just an income stream that could sometimes be pretty easily replaced, instead of one mega corporation, you have their competitor, right? Well, if we were talking back then about doing something about these advertising streams, something radical must have happened for these companies to literally own media companies, and we let it fly. That makes the whole concept of an independent media company being owned by, let's say, GE. I know I keep picking on them. I guess I'm allowed because my grandfather used to work for them, like way back in the day in the physics department. So I'm a little, I think I still own stock somewhere. Fuck them. Anyway, the idea of GE owning NBC or owning any media company, completely fucking ridiculous. And I think that's part of the reason that it kind of got through our consciousness. It was like, no, there's some rule against this. This can't be really happening. And most people aren't paying attention. And like I said, I was like, 5 to 15 in the 80s. So, I didn't know what the hell was going on. I'm sure there were some people talking against it, but for the most part, it kind of got through. And whatever codified law got overturned during the 80s, it was an absolute and ridiculous mistake. And not only was it a mistake, it was going in the wrong direction because there were already too many corporations involved through advertising. So whoever did that was quite the hammerhead. Whoever pushed that was quite the asshole. So we need to create something to go against this. Now, there are theories that not only are we owned by our media is owned by corporations, but there's kind of like a quid pro quo between the corporations and the CIA. I'm not going to get into too much detail about that. You just look up Project Mockingbird. I think a lot of the material for that has been let out under Freedom of Information. So Wikipedia has a great deal of information about that. And you could look at the evidence and make up your own mind as to whether, we have like a CIA kind of controlled media apparatus at this point, which is exactly what we didn't want. We wanted a free press. Freedom of press. Free press. They have to be free from not only the government like the CIA, but let's say the corporations own the government. They can't then turn around and own the media to become a mouthpiece for them. You can't have like a higher entity owning both or running both. I hope that makes sense to people. It's not that complex, but I know sometimes I come across putting out things that are really simple in my mind, and they're not as simple once I verbalize them. But just to reiterate, you can't have something owning the politicians and owning the government, which is how most of us feel, that the corporations pretty much own our politicians, and there's really zero chance of these kind of people or citizen-centered kind of rule changes, at least until Trump, and we kind of feel like he might be fighting for us, at least on some levels, or at least some people. Going against mainstream media really gives him a lot of points in my book. And I know that's not going to be too popular, but hey, think of what I'm mainly saying. That was just a tangent. What I'm mainly saying is that we can't have an entity that's controlling our government also controlling our media. All right? It just becomes like another, like the left hand of corporate control is to control the media, and the right hand is to control the politicians through Citizens United and other such really ridiculous they're not unconstitutional, they're anti-constitutional. We have to kind of bring that into our lexicon, that certain things are not even unconstitutional, they're directly anti-constitutional. And corporations having a voice like a person is anti-constitutional. You can't be a government of, for, and by the people and give a economic entity that's imaginary the same rights. You can't make them a citizen. They are chartered by a state. They are a legal fiction. They can't be made into people with people's rights. All you do is detract from the actual rights of people when you do that. You make them less important. So I'm not going to go on too much of a tangent with that. I think I said what I want to say with that. But in order for us to have a free press, and I'm giving a little background to more kind of exposed reason for that, we need kind of a mutual support system. Kind of like PBS, where they have their drives to get individual people to give a certain amount per month, and they get gifts and whatever, and they put on some cool stuff. Much more cerebral stuff than we're used to. And so many of us are so starving for that you end up getting a freaking PBS tote just because you just want to support them, and hopefully they'll keep putting on these kind of things that wouldn't fly in sensationalist corporate media. But if you look at PBS, they're supported by these institutions, the Rockefeller Corporate, Institute, or this institute or that institute. That's the same control mechanism. It's a corporation controlling another corporation, because everything's incorporated, right? Because no one's going to take on, being able to be personally sued where they work or for whatever company they started. So they want what's called limited liability. So everything's a corporation. Even like one guy who owns a bodega, it's a fucking corporation. It's just, it used to be called Chapter S. Now it's called a small business corporation. Depends on the state. But everything's a corporation. That's just the way we do business now. And that's fine. I have nothing against that. Because I would like to start a corporation. And if I get sued, I could lose the corporation, but I can't lose my house, let's say. Right? So that just makes sense. But we can't have a media corporation being owned by any other corporation, either by being a direct subsidiary or being an advertiser or anything like that, or even just being like a quote-unquote charitable institution that wants XYZ types of programming on. That's all very, very suspect. And honestly, being a direct subsidiary of GE should be criminal. We already made a mistake by allowing advertising to become the main way that they made money. We shouldn't have doubled down on that mistake. That was very prickish of us as a society. And we need to rectify that mistake. We need to kind of go backwards to the point where we're at least going, whoa, we shouldn't, yeah, that's illegal. No corporations owning independent media companies, period. No mergers and acquisitions when it comes to media companies, period. No mergers of media companies into mega media companies, period. The whole thing, the antitrust laws should be extremely strict when it comes to media companies. And we need to take away any sort of corporate financing from them. Period. No more corporate advertising. That has to be gone. And the only way that we can support that is through the Bernie program, I call it. And it's easy now. It's not like it used to be where you had to call in and give your credit card number and all that stuff. You put all that shit in through an SSL, that's called a secure socket layer. So it's kind of think of it as like a tunnel straight to them, so the rest of the internet doesn't even know it exists. And you put in whatever information. Half the time your browser finishes most of it for you. And you give, let's say, $1 a month to, the guy who you like on YouTube or Spreaker or whatever podcast place or, whatever the Mac equivalent is. Awesome. And the more of us see the need for that, the more people are supported, the more kind of services we could provide. Like I want to provide more like the straight statistics and fact sheets, I'll call them. So that people, they don't have to go into Wikipedia and start clicking on stuff. It will just list the facts without any kind of words in between, and you can kind of make up your own opinion. And of course, any articles I'd pull from the archive sites, I'd archive them first. Like some of the YouTubers suggest, so that you don't end up supporting CNN, because we want them to fall. We want them to fail. The only way to get rid of them right now and to replace them with a free press is to not give them any kind of revenue. And that's already happening, and it's great that it's already happening. But we need to kind of put those nails in the coffin. We need to bury them. And once they're buried and they have no money to sit there and tell a bunch of politicians, hey, you got to do this and that to keep us going. Once they can't give to politicians because there's nothing to give, they have no revenue to do it with, then we go in and we codify them as illegal. No more independent media controlled by bigger corporations or controlled by their advertising streams. We don't want that. Period. Simple, done. I mean, the minutia of it, I'm kind of an ADD guy, so, how that law would actually, be spelled out and the subsections and all of that, I have no idea. But I'd hire a lawyer, and just like every politician should kind of have a law team instead of being a lawyer, right? You want a politician who's an expert on healthcare, not an expert on law, to decide what we could do with healthcare and to push whatever. So that's the mentality I'm coming from, and I'm going to do a new show that's going to go more into that and be less of a stream of consciousness. And it's going to take me a while to prepare for that, so I apologize if it takes me a couple days to do my first show. I got a lot of research to do, and I want to actually kind of start figuring out, where my website's going to be. I'm probably going to pay for some sort of $10 a month website instead of getting hit with $200 a year bills from the DNS. I don't even know it's real, because I never bought anything from them. And suddenly I got to pay $200 to keep the couple of websites I own. So that would be simpler for me. And it might take me a little bit, like I said, up to maybe a week. And then I could put out more what I'm talking about as far as with corporate media. It's basically they chose one side or the other. Are they, quote unquote liberal or quote unquote right? And, with CNN and everybody being liberal and Fox News being on the right, but I'm sure there are others. I think there are actually some more more heavily right wing or practically alt right on some of the cable systems. Well, it's not about choosing teams. It's about finding out what's going on so that you can make a decision. I mean, how do you vote for somebody when you don't know the issue, right? And I've also had the thought that it would be great if we actually had the same thing in multiple languages. Maybe I'll hire some sort of translation service too, so that we don't have segments of the populace being served by, let's say, a couple of obscure media companies that are like NBC Espanol or something, and they don't get all the rest of the internet and all the rest of the information that's going on. So they're kind of behind the curve with that. And you can't really say, oh, well, they should speak English, because they're never going to, maybe I'm projecting from my own lack of language skills, but you're not going to get the really complex, the complex concepts in your second or third or fourth language. It almost always has to be in your first language. So as much as I support English as a lingua franca, I'm not blind to the fact that for these kind of complex concepts, you do have to have multiple language services, especially Spanish. It's the number 2 language in every state except maybe Hawaii. I'm not sure. I haven't looked that up in a while. Last time I looked, I think it was every state, but I could be totally wrong about that. So that's where I'm going with Voice of Reason. And I kind of avoided in the past having this kind of name for any of my shows, because it seems like anytime somebody says truth, it's nothing but. But I think I have some ways to kind of become that voice of reason, and I hope that I'm successful at that. And just, having a mentality of not being on side A or side B, if those sides even really exist for most of us, is a good first step, I think. And also I want to support other people with the raw facts in kind of an easy to use database, so they don't have to fly around the internet all the time. I'm looking for all these different facts that somebody could have compiled for them. So it's a quid pro quo, not just for people listening or watching when I do more videos and whiteboarding and stuff, but also for people who want to be independent free press. And I don't think there's any other way than through kind of individual donations, individual monthlies like Patreon, where you give $1 or $3 or $5, and you have these different levels. And one of the things I'm going to do is I'm going to put Babbles probably up on my Patreon, so that'll be kind of a reward for Patreon, kind of almost like a historical view. Hopefully, I mean that sounds pretty arrogant, but let's say I do become kind of internet news maven, and someday I have millions of viewers, and I'm kind of like grinning to myself when I say that. I know how unlikely that probably is. But then there's kind of the historical perspective. And to think he had 40-minute podcasts on Spreaker, and that's where he started, And then if you're one of my Patreon supporters, you'll get, access to all that stuff. I don't think I'm going to do on the website. I don't want to put too much information behind any kind of paywall. So that's probably going to be my main site. Unless I figure out a way to kind of put my stuff on Patreon, without you paying. I don't think that's possible. We'll see, though. I'll try to figure it out. Like I said, I'm not good with minutia. I'm pretty ADHD. In fact, my family is all pretty heavily ADHD on both sides. So it's a bit of a technological challenge, and I wish I had one of those college age girlfriends. Well, for a couple of reasons, but one of those super internet people. Not just somebody who can use the computer, but actually knows how it works and how websites work and all that stuff to be like my partner. We'll see. We'll see me going forward. I'm always on the hunt. And it's weird that I want the really smart hot girl, not just the hot girl. And that's where my life's going. I'm down in southern Florida, so not so much to ask. I mean, I got to tell you, if you live in New York, man, you are surrounded by some not so good looking people. Down here, though, oh my God, it is beautiful. And it's most of the year, too. But I digress. I'm kind of getting all, I know I'm getting all cisgender and getting horning out. So much so I needed a cigarette. Was it good for you? Anyway, less stream of consciousness, more of the report from, if any of you remember, Dennis Miller on Saturday Night Live. I'll endeavor to be a little entertaining, pointing out hypocrisy, etc. I don't always slam MSM and SJWs and super alt-rights. Because I believe the rest of us are just not those people, right? It's not about, they're too extreme for me. No, we're just not in any way related to them. Even if they repeat kind of a right or a left bumper sticker to sound more, more reasonable, they're not. Those aren't our people. Our people are everybody else who has a mind and who's going to see some issues with a bit of a conservative stance, other issues with a bit of a liberal stance, and that's being an independent adult human being. And I'm hoping to kind of help move the conversation towards that and move the resources that people have as far as reporting and journalism into more of a fact-based, solution-based orientation. And I have a lot of ideas as far as how that will work, and I hope that I succeed, not just for my own sake, but because our society is really missing that. And I don't know if they ever had it. I don't know if we in the Western world ever really had a free media. There was always advertising. There was always those streams. The one thing you do have is you kind of have these kind of county kind of little newspapers that are supported by the county. So those are still around. It's just that they don't get outside of that county. In New York, I was in Queens, New York. We had the Queens Ledger and a couple other ones that were just for Queens, and they were very local. And their police blotter was awesome because it was local. And a lot of times it would even be like certain neighborhoods in Queens. So you'd be like, oh shit, I know that kid who got arrested. I went to high school with him. It's fucking awesome to have like real local papers and local reporting. So it would be great to be a resource for them too. I'm in a complex and they have their own little newspaper. That's great, It's like they're like glorified newsletters, They don't have like anybody in Saudi Arabia to give them the skinny or whatever. But it's they're independent, and that's awesome. And maybe we could be use that kind of those little newspapers and the independent YouTubers and these people that aren't really dependent on like big national corporation advertisers. Like I'm up in the air as far as should we have like smaller advertisers? Should we have classifieds even? I'm pretty sure we should be able to allow classifieds as an income stream, and maybe Bob's Restaurant and there's a coupon. Like that doesn't seem like they're going to be so powerful they can twist national opinion. So it's we'll see how that works out. We're going to have to kind of codify it, and we're going to have to get into the details of it, of how we eventually get rid of corporate media. And I'm not talking in hyperbole. I'm talking about banning corporate media. No media company should be owned by like a large international corporation. It should only be owned by itself. It should not even be owned by its advertisers, in that if they're like a big time advertiser, they can sway. Like I said, that's like the gray area where we'd have to figure out the specifics. And I'm totally, I'm flat out saying I want them gone. I don't think CNN or MSNBC or NBC or any of these kind of corporate mouthpieces should exist. I know people say, oh, we're not banning CNN. Trump never did that. I'm like, yeah, you're right, and he fucking should. So I am flat out saying it's time to replace them. I hope I can provide resources for people who are trying to replace them. I hope I can garner a bit of support so I can keep that going on my Patreon. And I'm going to go into more of like a Dennis Miller kind of news reporting thing. Depending on how long I want to make these podcasts. So it may only be like a couple of things, or it may just be a date, Today's cast for, 3/4/2017, that it may be as simple as that. Although I'd kind of like to hint at people what's in there. But we'll see if that becomes like, a giant paragraph or not. So I have a method. I have some like simple ways of doing it that even my somewhat diminished brain can kind of understand. And I say we go for it. So I look forward to your interactions. I look forward to if you're more technical than I am and you have some advice, like, you could like put PayPal and advertising or whatever on your website at like, bobswebsitemaker.com, like any of that kind of thing is awesome. And I'm not going to sell like vitamins or any of that shit. Because there's kind of like, you kind of have to go the whole Alex Jones route where, oh, you're dying because you don't take this vitamin. I don't want to have like a mentality, even on the things I sell, the types of things I sell. I'd rather like read a book and partner with Amazon and say this was a really good book. And like, I'd rather get revenue from that, from somebody buying that book on my website, than them buying some sort of like, iPad or whatever. I just don't want to go into that level of it and have that kind of advertising. I don't know exactly. I think Google AdSense kind of mixes it up. I'll see if I can use that or if it will kind of detract. Again, if you're, an internet maven, and if you're listening to this on the internet, chances are you're better than me. I really look forward to those interactions, any advice as far as the technical side. And let's get this going. Let's replace these assholes. They've been lying to us for God knows how long. We're not even sure if we ever had an independent media. So it's time to kind of make the free press that we always wanted. We were taught we were supposed to be defending when we go to war and all that. Much of that was probably propaganda, but it's too late. They put that good guy image in our head and what the good guys would be, spreading the Bill of Rights across the world, or at least supporting people to get those rights. And whether it was just bullshit propaganda or maybe at some point we were actually doing the right thing, who knows? We could look into that, but it's time to make it that. It's time to make ourselves those good guys. And at least that's what I'm going to try to do. I look forward to your interactions. Like, comment, unlike, as you see fit.